Cedric had laughed when he cast Clara out to freeze 3 years ago, entirely convinced her womb was empty and her life was over. He clearly had no idea what an exiled Luna could do with an army at her back. Hell may have no fury like a woman scorned, but tonight, Cedric is facing something far worse. Clara crashing his royal banquet, flanked by the Alpha King and the twin heirs she was supposedly incapable of bearing. The great hall of Oakhaven was suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the sickeningly sweet perfume of betrayal. It was the winter of 1422, the harshest season the Midland territories had seen in a century, but the chill that gripped Clara's heart had nothing to do with the howling winds outside the castle walls. She stood in the center of the grand room, the stone floor biting through the thin soles of her slippers. All around her, the nobility of the Silver Pine Pack whispered behind jeweled goblets and silk sleeves. They were waiting for the execution of a marriage, a bond that was supposed to last a lifetime. Before her stood Cedric Halloway. He was the Alpha of Oakhaven, her mate, and the man she had loved since they were children playing in the castle courtyards. But the man looking down at her from the raised wooden dais was a stranger. His jaw was set, his amber eyes completely devoid of the warmth they once held for her. Beside him, draped in a gown of crimson velvet that cost more than a small village's yearly harvest, was Beatrice Whitmore. She wore a smile so sharp it could cut glass, her hand resting possessively on Cedric's forearm. "Clara Harrington," Cedric's voice boomed, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. The hall fell deathly silent. "For 3 years, you have stood by my side as my chosen mate. Yet, for 3 years, the goddess has seen fit to deny us an heir. Our pack grows restless. The borders are threatened. Oakhaven cannot survive with a weak, barren female at its helm." The words struck Clara like physical blows. Barren. It was the ultimate curse in their world, a label that stripped a female werewolf of her worth in the eyes of traditional packs. They had tried. Oh, how they had tried. But every moon that passed brought only disappointment. And eventually, Cedric's disappointment had curdled into resentment, and then into a cruel, calculated detachment. "Cedric, please," Clara whispered, her voice trembling, though she fought desperately to keep her chin high. "The healer said we just needed time. You know the strength of my bloodline." "Your bloodline is a rotting branch," Beatrice chimed in, her voice like poisoned honey. She stepped forward, running a hand over her own perfectly flat stomach. "The Alpha needs a true Luna, one who can give him sons, not empty promises and pitiful tears." Cedric didn't even look at Clara as he raised his hand, demanding silence. He looked out at his pack, playing the part of the reluctant, dutiful ruler making a hard sacrifice for his people. It was a flawless performance. "I, Cedric Halloway, Alpha of the Silver Pine Pack, officially reject you, Clara Harrington, as my mate and Luna." The words triggered an ancient, primal magic. The mate bond, a shimmering, invisible tether that connected their souls, snapped violently. It felt as though a serrated blade had been dragged down Clara's spine, ripping her chest open from the inside out. She gasped, collapsing to her knees on the unforgiving stone. A physical agony tore through her veins, making the world spin in a kaleidoscope of gray and black. She heard herself scream, a broken, hollow sound, but no one moved to help her. "By the ancient laws," Cedric continued, his voice echoing over her ragged breathing, "a rejected mate cannot remain within the pack lands, lest her presence bring a curse upon the new union. You are stripped of your titles, your lands, and your protections. You have until midnight to leave Oakhaven. If you are found within our borders by sunrise, you will be hunted down as a rogue." Her father, Lord Henry Harrington, stood in the crowd. Clara looked at him, begging with her eyes, but he merely looked away, his face pale, unwilling to risk the Alpha's wrath to save a disgraced daughter. She was utterly alone. They gave her no provisions. They stripped her of her heavy winter cloak, leaving her in nothing but a simple woolen traveling dress and worn boots. When the heavy iron gates of Oakhaven slammed shut behind her, the sound was like the closing of a tomb. Clara walked into the whispering woods, the frozen wind biting into her exposed skin like 1,000 needles. The snow was knee-deep, pulling at her legs with every step. The pain of the severed bond pulsed in her chest, a constant, agonizing rhythm that told her to just lie down in the snow and let the cold take her. She knew what Cedric intended. He didn't just want her gone. He wanted the winter to finish what he started, so he wouldn't have her blood directly on his hands. But as she dragged her freezing body through the dense, snow-covered pines, a different instinct took over. A quiet, fierce spark deep within her soul, her wolf, whom Cedric had constantly dismissed as small and weak, refused to yield. "Keep walking," she snarled in the back of Clara's mind. "If we die here, he wins." For 3 days and 3 nights, Clara marched northward. She survived on melted snow and a half-frozen rabbit her wolf managed to catch. She pushed through frostbite and fever, driven by a pure, unadulterated hatred for the man who had discarded her like trash. She didn't know where she was going until the trees began to thin, revealing a massive, jagged mountain range that pierced the gray sky. She had crossed the border into the frost marches, the domain of the northern wolves. It was forbidden territory, ruled by a pack so brutal and ancient that Southerners only spoke of them in hushed, terrified whispers. As the 4th night fell, Clara's body finally gave out. Her vision blurred, the blinding white of the snow fading to black. The last thing she heard before she lost consciousness was the heavy, rhythmic crunch of massive paws in the snow and a deep, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very earth beneath her. Clara woke to the overwhelming scent of pine, wood smoke, and something entirely intoxicating crushed cedar and dark rain. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself buried beneath a mountain of thick, luxurious firs. The ceiling above her was made of massive, dark oak beams, and a roaring fire crackled in a hearth the size of a small cottage. The air was warm, driving the deep, aching chill from her bones. "You should be dead," a voice rumbled. It was a voice that commanded immediate, involuntary submission. It resonated in her chest, rich and dangerous. She turned her head, her neck stiff, to see a man standing by the window, looking out over a frozen landscape. He was a giant of a man, clad in dark leather and heavy steel, a thick pelt of a direwolf draped over his broad shoulders. When he turned to face her, her breath caught in her throat. He had rugged, battle-scarred features, a strong jaw shadowed by dark stubble, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, piercing, intelligent, and wild. This was Arthur Pendleton, the Alpha King of the North, the man Southerners called the Wolf of Winter. As their eyes met, the scent of cedar and rain hit Clara with the force of a battering ram. Her wolf, who had been battered and exhausted, suddenly leaped up inside her mind, howling a song of absolute joy. The gaping, bleeding wound in her soul where Cedric had severed their bond was instantly engulfed in a wave of golden, soothing heat. "Mate," her wolf purred. "True mate." Arthur stiffened, his stormy eyes widening ever so slightly. He felt it too. The undeniable, soul-binding pull of a fated match. For a man rumored to be a heartless warlord, he looked completely disarmed. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping closer to the bed, his voice losing a fraction of its rough edge. "Clara," she croaked, her throat raw. "Clara Harrington, of Oakhaven." Arthur's brow furrowed. Holloway's mate. The rumors traveled even to the frost marches. Word is he took a new female, claiming his first was barren and fled in shame. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, turning into a painful cough. "He threw me out, stripped me of everything, and left me to freeze because I could not give him an heir." Clara expected pity, or perhaps disgust. Instead, Arthur's eyes flashed with a terrifying, protective fury. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, the shadows elongating as his aura flared. He stepped up to the edge of the bed and slowly, deliberately, reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His touch was incredibly gentle for a man with hands calloused from war. "Holloway is a fool," Arthur murmured, his thumb grazing her cheek, "and a dead man walking. But you are not barren, Clara. I can feel the strength of your life force." His bloodline was simply too weak to merge with yours. He was right. In the weeks that followed, Arthur did not lock her away or treat her as a fragile, broken thing. He showed her the ways of Ironhold, a fortress carved into the side of a mountain, bustling with fiercely loyal warriors, blacksmiths, and families who respected strength and honor above the petty politics of the southern courts. Arthur courted her with the reverence of a man who had waited centuries for a goddess to fall from the sky. There were no manipulative mind games, no whispering nobles. When he finally claimed her beneath the aurora borealis, declaring her his queen and Luna of the north, The bond they formed was so powerful, it caused a physical shockwave that sent the pack's wolves howling into the night sky. 6 months later, the impossible happened. Clara fell ill during a feast. When the pack healer examined her, her eyes widened in shock before she fell to her knees in joyous tears. Clara was pregnant. Arthur, the fearsome Alpha King who was said to have slaughtered entire rogue armies without blinking, fell to his knees and buried his face in her lap, weeping openly in front of his generals. Her pregnancy was difficult, her magic adjusting to the immense power of the pups growing inside her. But Arthur never left her side. He moved his seat of power to their bedchamber, commanding the vast northern territories while holding her hand. When the time came, she didn't just deliver an heir. She delivered two, Tristan and Gareth, twin boys, robust and roaring with life, carrying the silver eyes of their father and the dark hair of her ancestors. They were a living, breathing testament to her worth, a beautiful defiance against the man who had called her broken. For 3 years, she lived in absolute paradise. She was no longer the timid, desperate female of Oakhaven. She was Clara Pendleton, Queen of the North, mother of princes, and the true mate of the most powerful alpha on the continent. She wore heavy furs, learned to wield a hunting dagger, and commanded a pack that would gladly march into the fires of hell if she asked them to. She rarely thought of Cedric or Oakhaven. They were ghosts of a past life, until the invitation arrived. It was the dawn of spring in 1425. The ice was just beginning to thaw around the lower gates of Ironhold when the guards dragged a terrified, half-frozen southern courier into the great hall. Clara was sitting by the fire, bouncing Gareth on her knee while Tristan was busy trying to pull the tail of Arthur's massive personal direwolf, who was enduring the toddler's assault with saintly patience. Arthur sat at the grand oak table, reviewing maps of the eastern border. The courier dropped to his knees, trembling violently as he took in the sheer size of the northern warriors surrounding him. When his eyes landed on Arthur, he practically soiled himself. "Speak," Arthur commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that made the courier flinch. I bear messages from Alpha Cedric Halloway of Oakhaven," the boy stammered, holding up a leather satchel. "He is hosting the Centurial Pack Summit to celebrate his 3 years of prosperous rule. He sent envoys to all the territories." Arthur's eyes darkened, a deadly calm settling over his features. "Oakhaven does not send envoys to Ironhold. You southern dogs fear the frost." I was not sent to you, your grace," the courier squeaked, his eyes darting toward Clara, though he clearly didn't recognize the radiant, fur-draped queen before him as the exiled girl from 3 years ago. "I was instructed to leave a letter at the border village for a Clara Harrington." Lord Halloway's orders were to ensure it reached her family's old contacts, in case the rogue was still alive. The hall went dead silent. The crackle of the fire sounded like explosions in the quiet. Clara slowly stood up, handing Gareth to his nursemaid. She walked down the stone steps of the dais, the heavy train of her midnight blue gown sweeping against the floor. She stopped in front of the courier and held out her hand. "Give it to me," she said smoothly. The boy looked confused, but a low warning growl from Arthur made him scramble to pull a parchment sealed with the green wax of Oakhaven from his bag. She cracked the seal. The handwriting belonged to Beatrice. "To the disgraced Clara Harrington, should you still draw breath in the gutters of the earth, Alpha Cedric and Luna Beatrice cordially invite you to witness the greatness of Oakhaven at the Centurial Summit. Come and see the prosperity of a pack led by a true Luna. We have prepared a place for you among the servants, where you may behold the strength of our union and beg for scraps of our mercy." A cold, sharp laugh bubbled up from Clara's throat, echoing in the cavernous hall. Beatrice had sent this not expecting her to attend, but to ensure that if she was barely surviving somewhere as a rogue, she would know how thoroughly she had been replaced. It was a petty, malicious attempt at supreme humiliation. Arthur was out of his chair in a second, snatching the parchment from her hands. As his eyes scanned the words, the parchment literally ignited in his grip, burning to ash in seconds. His roar shook the dust from the rafters. The guards in the room instantly drew their steel. The massive direwolf leapt to its feet, and the atmosphere in the hall became so thick with killing intent it was hard to breathe. "I will march on Oakhaven tonight," Arthur snarled, his eyes flashing a brilliant, terrifying gold. "I will tear down his walls stone by stone." I will mount Holloway's head on a spike and let the crows feast on his eyes. Arthur, Clara said, her voice calm, cutting through his rage like a silver blade. She stepped into his personal space, placing her hands on his armored chest. She could feel his heart hammering, his wolf practically clawing to get out and annihilate the men who had insulted his mate. "We are not going to burn his hall," she said softly, looking up into his furious eyes. "That is too quick, too merciful. Cedric thrives on his pride, his reputation, and his belief that he is the most powerful alpha in the Midlands." Arthur's breathing slowed slightly as he looked down at her, though the gold in his eyes remained. "What would you have me do, my queen?" Clara smiled, a slow, predatory grin that made Arthur's chest rumble with approval. "He sent an invitation," she said, turning to look back at their twin boys, who were watching them with wide, curious eyes. "It would be incredibly rude of us to decline. He wants to show off his pack to the continent? Let him. Let all the alphas gather. And then we will walk through his front doors." Understanding dawned in Arthur's eyes, followed by a dark, wicked smirk. For the next 2 weeks, Ironhold was a hive of activity. They weren't just packing for a trip, they were orchestrating a theatrical display of absolute supremacy. Arthur ordered his finest armorer to forge ceremonial breastplates for the royal guard. Clara had the tailors work day and night, weaving gowns of spun silver and dark velvet, incorporating the sigils of the Northern Wolf alongside subtle nods to her own Harrington heritage. For Tristan and Gareth, small, perfectly tailored tunics of midnight blue were crafted, complete with miniature cloaks lined with snowfox fur. On the day of their departure, the courtyard of Ironhold was a sight that would strike terror into the heart of any southern king. 300 of the king's elite vanguard stood in perfect formation, sitting atop massive, heavily armored war horses. Flanking them were 50 of the king's personal direwolves, beasts the size of small carriages, their breath misting in the cold morning air. At the center of it all was their carriage, a massive construct of dark iron and polished oak. Arthur lifted Clara by the waist, setting her effortlessly inside before handing her the twins. As he climbed in beside her and shouted the order to march, she looked out the window toward the south. Cedric wanted a spectacle. He wanted to humiliate the weak, barren girl he had discarded. He had no idea that the girl was dead, and the Queen of the North was coming to crash his party. The journey south took exactly 12 days, a steady march that carried them away from the razor-sharp winds and frozen tundra of the frost marches, down into the blossoming valleys of the Midlands. For the vanguard of Ironhold, the warmer climate was a mild nuisance. The men loosened their heavy furs, grumbling good-naturedly about the humidity, while the massive direwolves panted, missing the crisp bite of northern snow. But for Clara, the changing landscape felt deeply symbolic. With every mile that the snow gave way to blooming spring fields and budding oak forests, it felt as though she were shedding a suffocating, ancient skin. She was no longer the broken, shivering girl who had been cast into the winter. She was returning as the storm itself. As they approached the borders of Oakhaven, Arthur noted the lax security with a sneer of professional disgust. They passed 2 watchtowers that were practically crumbling at their foundations, the sentries either asleep or too terrified by the sheer, earth-shaking rumble of the procession to sound an alarm. A weak alpha relies on his neighbor's goodwill and sheer luck rather than his own steel, Arthur muttered, sitting across from her in the carriage. He methodically adjusted the heavy dark iron gauntlets on his forearms, his silver eyes dark with barely contained violence. He leaves his lands entirely exposed. It is a miracle a rogue faction hasn't slaughtered this pack in their sleep. They deliberately timed their arrival for the climax of the Centurial Pack Summit. It was the night of the Grand Banquet, a tradition where the host alpha would flaunt his pack's wealth, finalize vital trade agreements, and solidify political alliances. As their carriage crested the final hill, the sprawling courtyard of Oakhaven Castle came into view, bathed in the orange glow of 1,000 torches. The grounds were overflowing with the colorful banners of visiting dignitaries, the blue falcons of Alpha Richard Lancaster from the Western Plains, and the golden stags of Alpha Henry Beaufort of River Run. Inside the Great Hall, the very room where Clara's soul had been ripped apart 3 years prior, a raucous, oblivious celebration was underway. Through the massive stained-glass windows, the sounds of lutes, clashing golden goblets, and roaring drunken laughter spilled out into the cool spring night. It was a desperate, glittering facade of prosperity. From her seat in the royal carriage, Clara smoothed down the heavy skirts of her midnight blue gown, its fabric interwoven with threads of pure silver that caught the dim light. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but not with the paralyzing fear she had once known in this place. It beat with an intoxicating, electric anticipation. Beside her, Tristan and Gareth were wide awake, sensing the undeniable shift in their parents' demeanor. They sat quietly on the velvet cushions, their bright silver eyes glowing in the shadows, clad in their miniature northern cloaks lined with snow fox fur. "Are you ready, my queen?" Arthur asked, his voice a low, soothing anchor that immediately grounded her racing thoughts. He reached across the carriage, his large, calloused hand engulfing hers in a grip of absolute solidarity. She looked into his stormy eyes, drawing strength from the boundless devotion she found there. "Let us show them what a true winter storm looks like." Arthur gave a sharp nod and signaled his vanguard commander, a massive, heavily scarred warrior named Kalen, who rode just outside their window. Kalen reined in his warhorse, unhooked a massive war horn crafted from the hollowed tusk of a mammoth, and pressed it to his lips. He blew a single, earth-shattering note. The sound ripped through the tranquil spring night like a physical shockwave. It was so loud, so guttural and deeply primal, that the very stone foundations of Oakhaven seemed to vibrate in terror. The cheerful music inside the great hall stopped instantly. The laughter died in a choked gasp. Before the Oakhaven guards stationed at the heavy iron doors could even comprehend what was happening, 50 northern direwolves stepped silently out of the surrounding tree line, their amber and yellow eyes glowing ominously in the darkness. They moved with lethal grace, their massive jaws slightly parted. The southern guards dropped their halberds, tripping over their own boots as they scrambled backward in sheer, unadulterated terror. Arthur's vanguard rode into the courtyard in perfect, terrifying unison. The heavy, synchronized thud of 300 armored war horses striking the cobblestones sounded like the marching drum of doom. They formed a tight, impenetrable ring of dark steel and bristling weaponry around the carriage, trapping the southern nobility inside their own fortress. The massive oak doors of the great hall were thrown open from the inside. Alpha Cedric stepped out onto the grand stone balcony overlooking the courtyard, flanked by Beatrice and a dozen of his supposedly elite royal guards. In the torchlight, Cedric looked remarkably older, his face deeply lined with the unspoken stress of ruling a pack he was secretly running into the ground. Beatrice, draped in an emerald silk gown that was clearly meant to dazzle the visiting royalty, looked down at the courtyard in absolute, paralyzing horror. "Who approaches the gates of Oakhaven?" Cedric yelled, though his voice cracked noticeably under the oppressive, suffocating magical aura radiating from Arthur's vanguard. "Identify yourselves immediately, or be fired upon by our archers." Kalen laughed, a booming, mocking sound, and spurred his horse forward. "You stand in the presence of the vanguard of the Frost Marches." Kalen's voice thundered effortlessly across the silent courtyard, echoing off the castle walls. "Lower your eyes, bare your throats, and open your halls for Arthur Pendleton, the Alpha King of the North." A collective gasp echoed from the hundreds of dignitaries now spilling out onto the lower balconies and staircases. The King of the North never left his icy domain. He was a phantom, a warlord who never attended trivial southern summits. His presence here was the equivalent of a mythic god of war suddenly dropping into a mortal tavern. Cedric's face drained of all color, turning the shade of spoiled milk. His jaw worked frantically, but no sound came out. Beatrice gripped the stone railing so hard her knuckles turned stark white, her emerald gown suddenly looking like a cheap costume. "Open the doors!" Cedric finally shrieked at his paralyzed guards below, his voice high-pitched with panic. "Throw the doors wide! Now!" The carriage door swung open. Arthur stepped out first. He didn't wear the ostentatious ceremonial silks or velvets favored by the southern alphas. He wore dark, oiled leather, heavy steel shoulder plates, and the unmistakable, terrifying pelt of an alpha direwolf draped across his broad shoulders. He looked exactly like what he was. A warlord stepping onto a fresh battlefield, raw and devastatingly powerful. He turned back toward the carriage, his expression softening only for a fraction of a second, and offered Clara his hand. When her satin slipper touched the cobblestone, a profound, breathless hush fell over the entire courtyard. Clara stepped fully into the torchlight, her silver-threaded gown catching the flames, making her look as though she were woven from starlight, shadows, and ice. Atop her head sat a crown of jagged, dark iron embedded with raw, glittering diamonds. The whispers started instantly, rippling through the crowd like a virus. Is that? By the goddess, it cannot be. Look at her eyes. It's the Harrington girl. It's Clara. Clara ignored every single one of them, keeping her chin high and her gaze locked on the balcony above. Cedric was gripping the stone balustrade, his amber eyes bulging from their sockets as if he were witnessing a corpse claw its way out of the grave. Beside him, Beatrice's smug, sharp features had melted into an ugly, twisted mask of disbelief, envy, and dawning terror. But the real masterpiece of her revenge was yet to come. Arthur reached back into the carriage. With effortless strength, he lifted Tristan and Gareth, settling one boy in each of his massive, armored arms. The toddlers, completely unbothered by the tense, heavy atmosphere, looked around at the torches and the crowds with wide, curious eyes. Their thick, dark hair and Arthur's unmistakable, piercing silver eyes were a profound, undeniable declaration of their elite lineage. Heirs. Two strong, healthy, roaring boys. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the spring wind rustling the velvet banners overhead. Clara watched as Cedric's knees actually buckled slightly, forcing him to lean heavily against the stone pillar. The woman he had publicly discarded, the woman he had sent into the snow to die for the crime of being barren, had just returned as a reigning queen, and she was holding twin princes of the most feared, powerful bloodline on the continent. Arthur offered Clara his arm, and together, they began the slow walk up the grand stone steps. The sea of southern nobles scrambled to part for them, fleeing like water from oil, not a single soul daring to breathe as the true rulers of the winter marched into the heart of the spring. As they crossed the threshold into the great hall, the sheer opulence of Cedric's summit was fully revealed. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted swans, candied fruits, and towers of imported wine. It was a desperate facade of wealth. Cedric scrambled down from the balcony, practically tripping over his own ceremonial cape to meet them at the center of the room. Beatrice trailed behind him, her face flushed with a toxic mixture of shame and fury. Clara's father, Lord Henry Harrington, stood near the front of the crowd. When his eyes met hers, he took a step forward, his mouth opening in shock, but she dismissed him with a glacial stare that rooted him to the spot. Your Grace," Cedric stammered, bowing so low he nearly scraped his nose on the floor. He didn't dare look at Clara. "King Arthur, we are deeply honored. We did not expect the crown of the North to grace our humble summit." Arthur did not bow. He didn't even incline his head. He stared down at Cedric with an expression of mild disgust, like a man inspecting a stain on his boot. "I am not here for your wine, Holloway," Arthur rumbled, his voice projecting clearly to every corner of the silent hall. "I am here because my queen received an invitation, and we thought it impolite to ignore it." Cedric finally, agonizingly lifted his eyes to Clara's. The sheer regret, the crushing realization of what he had thrown away, washed over his face in a sickeningly satisfying wave. "Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling. "How?" "That is Queen Clara to you, Alpha Holloway," Clara corrected smoothly, her voice ringing out with the confident, commanding cadence of a northern Luna. "And I must thank you. If you hadn't banished me to freeze in the Whispering Woods, I never would have found my true mate, nor my true kingdom." Beatrice couldn't contain herself. The venom in her veins overrode her survival instincts. "This is a trick," she shrieked, stepping forward, pointing a trembling, jewel-encrusted finger at the twins in Arthur's arms. "Those cannot be hers. She is barren." The healer said she was a dried, useless husk. She must have stolen those whelps. A low, vibrating snarl erupted from Arthur's chest, a sound so terrifying that half the room instinctively took a step back. His aura slammed into the room, heavy and suffocating. Beatrice gasped, choking on the sheer magical pressure as Arthur's eyes flared a brilliant, lethal gold. "Speak of my sons like that again, southern whore," Arthur growled, his voice vibrating the glass on the tables, "and I will rip your tongue from your throat and feed it to my wolves." Cedric frantically pulled Beatrice behind him, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, your grace, forgive her. She is unwell. The stress of the pack." "The stress of a failing pack, you mean?" Clara interrupted, deciding it was time to drop the final curtain on this pathetic play. She signaled to Kaelin, who stepped forward and unrolled a long, heavy parchment. Let us speak of this prosperous rule you are celebrating tonight, Clara said, projecting her voice so every visiting alpha could hear. She paced the floor, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. Alpha Richard Lancaster, she called out, turning to the alpha of the Western Plains. Has Cedric repaid the 50,000 gold pieces he borrowed to fix his eastern watchtowers? Richard Lancaster blinked, his face reddening as he glared at Cedric. No, Your Majesty. He claimed a poor harvest delayed the payment. And Alpha Beaufort, she turned to the River Run leader. Has Oakhaven fulfilled its quota of iron ore for your blacksmiths? Beaufort crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. Not a single cart in 6 months. The hall erupted in furious, hushed whispers. Cedric's face turned the color of old ash. You see, Clara continued, enjoying the absolute terror radiating from her former mate. For the past 3 years, my husband and I have been watching Oakhaven. Without the Harrington fortune which my father cowardly allowed you to seize, and without a Luna capable of managing trade, this pack has rotted from the inside out. She stopped in front of Cedric, looking down at him. You sent me a letter, Beatrice, inviting me to beg for scraps of your mercy. But the truth is, Oakhaven is bankrupt. Your borders are failing. Your people are starving while you throw lavish banquets with borrowed coin. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. 2 weeks ago, Alpha Halloway sent a desperate, groveling plea to Ironhold, begging for a trade alliance and a massive loan from the northern coffers to save his pack from foreclosure. He offered to send his own brother as a ward to secure it. She tossed the letters at Cedric's feet. They scattered across the stone floor like dead leaves. You invited me here to humiliate me, Clara whispered, stepping so close only he and Beatrice could hear. But I came to show the world that you are nothing but a frightened, impoverished boy playing dress-up. You threw away a diamond to pick up a worthless rock, Cedric. Clara looked at Beatrice, who was shrinking into herself, her fake pride shattered into a million pieces. And by the way, Beatrice, the reason you haven't conceived an heir in 3 years isn't because you're stressed. Cedric's bloodline is cursed with weakness. Good luck with that. Cedric dropped to his knees, utterly defeated, his reputation destroyed in front of the most powerful leaders in the country. He had lost the respect of his peers, the trust of his creditors, and any chance of an alliance. Arthur stepped to her side, wrapping a massive protective arm around her waist. The twins giggled, reaching out to pull on her silver gown. The North rejects your proposal, Halloway, Arthur stated coldly, sealing Oakhaven's fate. If you ever cross into our territory, or if you ever speak my queen's name again, I will return, and I will not be merely carrying words. They turned their backs on the broken Alpha and his weeping Luna, walking out of the great hall with the exact same undeniable grace with which they had entered. The Southern Alphas parted for them, bowing their heads in deep, genuine respect. Clara's father fell to his knees as she passed, weeping, but she didn't spare him a second glance. The night air felt incredibly sweet as she stepped back into the carriage. Clara took Gareth into her arms, pressing a kiss to his dark curls, while Arthur held Tristan, a rare, soft smile playing on the ruthless king's lips. As the vanguard rode away from Oakhaven, leaving a ruined kingdom in their wake, Clara knew she had not just survived the winter. She had become the storm. Are you obsessed with this epic tale of betrayal, power, and ultimate revenge? Did Clara's glorious return give you chills? Don't miss out on more dramatic, heart-pounding werewolf romance stories just like this one. Make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a twist. Drop a comment below what would you have done to Cedric. See you in the next story.